All right, this is Openstax U.S. History, Chapter 23, Section 5, Demobilization and its Difficult Aftermath. So demobilization refers to the end of World War I. So to mobilize for a war is to get ready for it. To demobilize is to make the transition from war to peace. And so this caused a lot of problems in the United States, disorder and fear. One was biological. A very bad flu hit the globe in 1919, sometimes referred to as the Spanish flu. This killed approximately 10 million people across the globe and had a significant impact on the United States. It's been cited as one of the epidemics that the recent COVID-19 has been kind of compared to. So, even when the war was over, the Spanish flu, or this virus that spread around the globe, killed almost as many people, and this wreaked havoc not just in the United States, but globally. On top of that, the situation for workers changed. Now recall that generally speaking, overall workers were pretty much better off during the war because of high wages and better working conditions. However, when the war was over, that guarantee that workers gave to not go on strike expired. And the fact that they were getting paid good wages during the war, that began to be challenged. And so because there were massive cuts to wages, because workers were laid off when the war was over, you had a series of worker strikes, or what we might call labor unrest. On top of that, you had an increase of racial conflict, specifically the conflict between black and white. This was in part due to the Great Migration. Again, recall the Great Migration was the movement from African Americans out of the South. And so many of these conflicts, in fact, happened in the North, as opposed to what we learned about in the era of Reconstruction, where a lot of the racial violence going on at that time was in the South. Here, these riots are happening mostly in the North. The Red Summer of 1919 simply refers to the year in which many of these race riots took place in places like, Chicago. I think St. Louis was also one of them. But the Tulsa riot in 1921 was when one particular city, Tulsa, Oklahoma, the black, quote-unquote, Wall Street, which was a neighborhood in which you had a lot of very affluent African Americans, they called it Black Wall Street because of the wealth that was there, was destroyed by white rioters. And so both these instances, the Red Summer and the Tulsa riot, really indicated to America that race relations were getting worse. And this is actually kind of contrary to what you might think of a war. Typically when you think of a war, you think of it as a way for the country to unite. In fact, the exact opposite was occurring, and here are some photographs from such race riots that took place. On top of that, you have international concerns, typically the Red Scare, and this refers to the Russian Revolution and the communist takeover. And so the reason why they call it the Red Scare is because the flag of the Bolsheviks and Lenin, who had taken over Russia and installed the communist government, their flag is red. And so the fear was that communism, because it was successful in Russia, could potentially be successful in the United States. This sparked off a series of raids known as the Palmer raids. Mitchell Palmer was, I want to say he was, what's his position? I can't remember exactly what his position was, but he worked for the government. No, I don't know. I can't recall right now. But Mitchell Palmer led a series of raids against suspected communists, anarchist, immigrants, and led these raids without, and this is really what is significant, without warrants, right? I think warrants with an A. And so this crackdown on civil liberties in the aftermath of the war, because there was such a fear that communists were going to, here's two political cartoons that communists were going to take over. Here it's showing kind of radicals immigrating to the U.S. with a guy who has a bomb on his head. Here you can see that labor is sort of leading the step to chaos, that Workers lead to strikes. Strikes lead to disorder. Disorder leads to Bolshevism, which of course is Lenin's party in Russia. That leads to chaos, and who knows what's going to end up at that point. So a lot of things that are going on here, right? Biological, labor strikes, racial conflicts, fear about international affairs. It was a very, very chaotic time. So much so that Americans in the election of 1920 really demanded a return to normalcy, really a rejection of things like progressivism. You know, even progressive policies like the prohibition of alcohol turned out to be not that popular. Rejection of internationalism. You know, many questions began to question whether or not the United States should have participated in World War I. And so Warren Harding, who was the Republican, won that election in 1920, more or less promising Americans a return to normalcy.